think we can get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Melanie Chow, and I will be moderating today's event, Customer Discovery, When Everyone is Lying to You. I am joined today by Lucas Peralta. Lucas Peralta is Associate Director for College and Cross-Campus Programs at the Polsky Center at UChicago. Lucas, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Welcome to my kitchen on this wonderfully snowy Chicago day. Like Melanie said, my name is Lucas Peralta. I work for the Polsky Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation at the University of Chicago. I'm an Associate Director for Cross-Campus and College Programs at the university. And the things that you should know about me is that I work for the educational arm of the Polsky Center, meaning that my job is to help create and foster educational opportunities for young entrepreneurs. I've been there for 4 years. I spent the first 3 years managing the National Science Foundation I-Course Site program. And I have been running the College New Venture Challenge, which is the undergraduate business launch competition, for the last 4 years as well. And in my job there, I have been working with early stage entrepreneurs to think through their ideas and figure out the best strategies for validating those ideas. And this is my background is in education. My master's degree is in education. But this background has given me a lot of insight into the patterns that indicate which teams are going to have the best chance of success at kind of achieving the outcomes that they're looking to achieve. And so I'm excited to share some of these patterns with you, and I'm excited to share some of the things that I've realized over the last 4 years working with kind of early stage new ventures. So in my workshop today, I'm going to cover kind of a few things. The thing you should know about customer discovery is that we run whole 7-week programs on customer discovery at the Polsky Center. So, in our 1-hour workshop today, what I hope that you can walk away from is kind of an understanding of what customer discovery is, an understanding of why it's important, and kind of the first steps on how you can get started. It's a process that the most successful entrepreneurs kind of keep going even once they are in the market, even once they have fundraised, even once they have kind of achieved early success. And you'll see why, because it provides you deep insight into kind of the most important things that you need to know about the customer for your product. So that first question I mentioned, what is customer discovery? First off, you should know that it's a key component for all of the kind of early stage Polsky Center educational programs. And it's a process that the Polsky Center didn't create. And it's a process that the Polsky Center isn't alone in teaching. It's rooted in lean startup methodologies pioneered by Stanford professor Steve Blank and entrepreneur Eric Ries. For those of you who have heard the book, The Lean Startup, these kind of methodologies are kind of key to entrepreneurship, particularly entrepreneurship after the tech bubble of the late 90s, early 2000s. And it's a process designed to help entrepreneurs test assumptions for the customers that they think will consume their product. But I want to kind of move past this, right? Because the term customer discovery is inherently jargon. It's really, really common, particularly in entrepreneurship nowadays. But what you should think about is a broader term for the word customer, right? It could be users, it could be your paying customers, it could be stakeholders, it could be people key to the decision-making around the purchase of your product. And for particularly complex B2B companies, it could be all of the above, right? You should do customer discovery about every stakeholder in the process. And it's even applicable to nonprofits. At the Polsky Center, we deal with nonprofits and social ventures all the time. And rather than thinking of the customer as who's paying, you could think about who's the beneficiary, who's the impact investor, who is important to the process of creating the outcome that I want to create. And so customer discovery is ultimately the process of just learning who is or isn't your, and I've got some lists here, a list here, purchasers, stakeholders. This can go on and on and on for whatever stakeholder matters most for you. And this process, for those of you who have any sort of STEM background, should seem very familiar. It's inherently analogous to the scientific method, particularly in that the goal of entrepreneurship in the lean startup era is to identify a problem, come up with a solution, test that solution, and then iterate, right? This looks like the scientific method where you make observations, you ask questions, you form hypotheses, you make predictions, you concoct some sort of experiment to test that prediction, and then you take that information and you figure out, okay, what do I need to do next to further hone in on the knowledge I'm trying to unearth? And specifically, as it relates to customer discovery, we want to focus on one key question. Will my customers, my subscribers, my users, my end users, my whoever it is that I want to use my product, will they pay for it? Will they use it? Will they download it? We want to know whether or not they will use what we're creating. And there are a lot of ways to do market testing. There are a lot of ways to test our products, right? We could put our products into the market and have them and do user testing where they're responding to the actual use of our product. But we want to like pull back a little bit and think about, do they even have a need for this? That's what customer discovery is about. And in the process of working with all of these teams, these hundreds of teams over the last 4 years, there are a few lessons that I think are really valuable to early stage entrepreneurs nowadays. And I think there are two kind of products that kind of there are two products that are emblematic of the lessons that I think are important for early stage entrepreneurs to learn. And those two products are products that, by all means, I think that a lot of you will know. First off, Quibi, which is a former media company, and the iPad, which is almost ubiquitous in our lives nowadays. I also just want to mention, if you have any questions along the way, I'm monitoring the chat. And so feel free to ask any questions you have along the way in the chat. Melanie here, who is moderating this, will help pass along those questions to me. And I'm happy to take questions as we go. And I also want to kind of seed the sense that this is a process that is inherently a skill that people need to learn. And we're hoping that a few of you might step in and participate at the end of this workshop, because there is a opportunity for you to be engaged in what customer discovery is, and we want you to participate. And so we're going to need a couple volunteers at the end of this workshop. So I just want to seed that for a second. I should have said that up at the beginning. I'm excited to share with you kind of these lessons I've learned, but I wanted to mention that before we move on. So for those of you who don't know, although I am certain that almost everyone on this call knows, since you are interested in entrepreneurship, Quibi was a video platform that was focused on vertical, short form, high production value media. And the thing you want to know about Quibi is that they raised a lot of money. They raised $1.75 billion in venture capital. That is an incredible amount. Like even by Silicon Valley standards of companies raising money to create new and disruptive technology, that's an insane amount of venture capital to raise. And they spent a lot of money telling people about their product. They were famously spent $5.6 million on a Super Bowl ad. Their marketing budget was way beyond that $5.6 million. And there were national commercials, there was internet advertising. They were trying to get their brand out there. And just in case you didn't, like, you could almost see why Quibi was kind of like an obvious thing to try and create, right? There is almost ubiquitous use of smartphones right now. Like, we're kind of in the golden age of television where television shows have higher and higher production value. They have bigger and bigger budgets. And you can look at like the rise of Reels on Instagram or the rise of TikTok and say like short form content is going to be valuable moving forward. And so they came up with this idea to just create like almost television quality, movie quality, short form content in a vertical format that was meant to be consumed on smartphones. And you can kind of see why they wanted to create that, right? Like at a cursory level, the market trends made a lot of sense. But for those of you who don't know about Quibi, is they kind of failed spectacularly. Quibi is no longer a company that exists. You can see some of the headlines here when they entered the market, and the early problems became apparent. Quibi, the fatal miscalculation that doomed Katzenberg and Whitman's streamer. What can marketers learn from Quibi's failure? Quibi is struggling because it overestimated how consumers absorb short content. And what's funny about this is these are all headlines from like shortly after they launched. These are all headlines from before they actually decided to shut down. So these are headlines about an operating company at the time. But there's a quote that I think is most applicable here. It's from an article in Adweek written by Ben Silverstein. And he said, Quibi isn't failing because of the novel coronavirus pandemic, lack of brand awareness, or even poor content. It's failing because the whole premise is based on an incorrect assumption about consumer wants. Let's see, we have a chat message here. Any website that you know can help us get easily to customers that can do market research for us. That's true. We're gonna talk about strategies for reaching customers. And it's true, customers are very easily reachable nowadays. But I want to focus a little bit here on this last part. It's failing because the whole premise is based on an incorrect assumption about consumer wants. This is inherently avoidable. Quibi kind of acted like a company pre the tech bubble, right? It was in stealth mode for a long time. It raised money, but people didn't know about it for a long time. It was this idea about what consumers wanted without kind of the early pilots, the early prototyping, the beta launches that we're used to nowadays. We're used to these companies coming into the market, not to the whole market, but like bringing in early adopters and testing the market. And this kind of behavior is inherently kind of what led to that early tech bubble. And it's totally avoidable. And it's a lesson I want entrepreneurs to learn as they move forward with pursuing new ideas. Let's see, there's a comment here that says user research plus innovation strategist here. I'd like to advocate for the common misconception that market research equals user research. That's very, very true. User research is about how people react to your product. Market research is there a need for your product? Does someone need the problem that you are trying to solve for them? And we're going to get a little bit more into that. And it's at this stage that I always get some student say something along these lines to me. Okay, if entrepreneurship is about figuring out what it is your customers need, Here's a counterexample. The iPad is an example of a company telling consumers what they wanted. It's something that consumers didn't know they needed, but Apple launched it and they realized that they wanted it, right? This is always used as a counterexample when I'm talking to students about why it is they need to verify that something is needed by the market, something is really wanted by the market. And there's a secret here that Apple doesn't talk about a lot, although it's kind of obvious, and it's that they know more about their customers than any of us hope to ever know about our customers, right? They've built an incredible ecosystem designed around consumer behaviors, and they know and understand them super well, right? The thing is that when students tell me that, what they're assuming is that Apple didn't already deeply understand the markets that they were trying to create by launching the iPad or launching the iPod years before that. They knew that market really, really well. They knew what their customers wanted really, really well. They built a solution and they tested it. And ultimately, what they created, the iPad, the iPod, whatever it is, you can look at Apple's many, many, many disrupting products and technologies. They knew that when they launched those products that it would be worth the risk. So customer discovery is important because it helps confirm assumptions we have about customer needs and wants. And it reduces the risk of failure to the point where we can think about our risks as early as possible in the product development cycle. It's also inexpensive, right? Almost no one has Apple's resources. Like Apple knew their customers really well, but it's possible for entrepreneurs to know their customers really, really well and not have Apple's resources. Because businesses are risky. Entrepreneurs have a lot to lose. They have time to lose. They have money to lose. Like there's a huge opportunity cost to starting a business. And, you know, failure is kind of glorified in entrepreneurship, but there is still a threat to reputation and credibility as you try and move into new markets and you try to disrupt kind of legacy markets. And there are also very expensive aspects of running a startup. It's very expensive to employ people. It's very expensive to pay for advertising. It's very expensive to develop technology. And you can think about Quibi here, right? Like Quibi's multi-million-dollar marketing costs existed months before they ever launched publicly. And operations are going to take a lot of time, right? It takes time to hire a team. It takes time to develop products. It takes time to fundraise. And you can look at Quibi here again. They were founded 2 years before they launched. So they were spending millions and millions of dollars for years before they ever entered the market. And what the Polsky Center, and this is not unique to the Polsky Center, what entrepreneurship in general, particularly entrepreneurial academics, try and convince entrepreneurs of nowadays is that you can get started very inexpensively by just talking to people. So, you know, just to step back for a second, the key components, the inherent components to any customer discovery process, and you can find a lot of very free resources about customer discovery out there, and I highly encourage you to find those resources. But the kind of inherent components are the identification of assumptions around an idea, the identification of the risks inherent in those assumptions, and the process around which we conduct customer interviews aimed at validating and invalidating those assumptions, and then as a result, mitigating the risks surrounding them. So why customer interviews, right? There are a lot of ways to research the market. Customer interviews will help you understand your customers because they'll help you learn key customer behaviors. They'll help you learn what frustrates them, what drives them to be passionate about their jobs, what drives them to be passionate about their interests, why they pay for things. And they'll also give you a lot of insight into the ways at which they are going about solving the problem currently, right? All entrepreneurship is inherently about solving a problem. And particularly if you find a problem that a lot of people want solved, there are ways that they are mitigating that problem currently. And then there are actually some secondary upsides to doing customer interviews. They'll help you build a network and they'll help you learn a lot about the industry that you are working in as you continue to develop your idea, as you continue to develop your product, and as you become a bigger and bigger player in that industry. You want to know the key people who are important decision makers. You want to know the way people behave in that industry. And customer interviews help you kind of achieve all of these things. But like more than anything, if I want you to take away one thing, is that like you can talk to people now and there are basically no costs to doing so. I mean, there's a time commitment. Talking to people does take time, but you don't have to have an MVP. You don't have to have a pilot. You don't have to have done any coding. You don't have to have any physical product. You can just talk to people and understand what is driving them before you ever invest time and money into the creation of a new product or service. And the best part is if you do it right, you can confirm that customers will exist on the other end of the creation of your product. You can confirm that they will find your product valuable. And that means that you can confirm that they will pay for your solution, right? If we think about Quibi, they entered the market. I'm probably one of the few people who have watched multiple Quibi shows. They were very, very high quality productions, right? Like the best actors, the best directing talent. They did a lot to make the product a quality product. But at the end of it all, no one was willing to pay for it. And so what customer discovery is about is helping you confirm that your idea is worth the risk and worth the money of actually putting the effort into creating it. So now let's talk about customer interviews themselves. I mentioned there's a lot of ways to do customer research, and you should explore the ways that are important. You should explore all of the potential customer research methods, but I want to talk about one in particular that is key to customer discovery, and that's the customer interview, right? The customer discovery, customer interview, as we understand it today in the entrepreneurial space, is more related to ethnographic interviews from anthropology than it is to any other form of customer research. It's aimed at understanding customer behavior. It's not about getting customers to respond to your idea. It's not about getting customers to respond to your product. It's not about getting them excited for the future launch of your product. It is not a sales meeting. It's focused on confirming a problem or opportunity is substantial enough to drive purchasing behaviors. It's meant at validating the assumptions you have about what people want, what problems people want solved, and why they want it, right? I've got a couple chat messages here. I'm just going to read them real quick. Founder confirmation and overconfidence bias is real, and customer validation needs to happen before a product is built. This is what I'm getting at. This is key to modern entrepreneurship, right? Chances are we have biases that exist, and we think products are a good idea because of our circumstances, because of our experiences. The question is, do other people agree with me? Do other people make the same assumptions as me? Will other people pay for the same things I will pay for, right? You know, most products are good products from like a does it work standpoint, right? Like at the Polsky Center at the University of Chicago, we tend to say that we are industry agnostic because we trust our entrepreneurs that they can create a technology that does what they say it does, that it's good technology or that it's a good product. The question we're more interested in is does the market agree with them that this is a good product, that they will buy it, right? We also see another comment here that says, we see this especially as a gap in the B2B space. Like B2B spaces are really complicated, right? Like more often than not, unlike the consumer space, B2B spaces have multiple people involved in the sales cycle, right? You have the person who is signing the check, right? That has to sign off on the purchase. You have the end users, you have the key stakeholders that are going to find the most value from your technology. Like all of these people have to be on board for you to sell into businesses. And if you don't understand the motivations and the underlying assumptions that are driving the creation of your product, there is a huge chance that you're going to enter the market, that you're going to begin selling, and there are just going to be people who aren't interested, or maybe are interested, but not interested enough to pay for your product. So when you think about how you should conduct customer discovery interviews, when you think about your assumptions, what you need to think about is what has to be true for your idea to work, right? We talked about the iPad and we talked about Quibi, and I've got some examples here, right? Like, would people do everyday tasks on a tablet? Like, what do they wish their phone would do that it currently does? Like, for Quibi, it's like people like to consume media on their phone. Like, that's obviously true, but like, what types of media? That was a huge question for Quibi that turned out to be a big deal for their market. And you should approach customer interviews in a way that allows you to validate and invalidate those assumptions, right? So when you think about what has to be true for your product to exist, for your product to work, for your market to function, you need to think about, can I confirm or disconfirm the assumptions that I have made? Customer interviews help you turn those assumptions into actual knowledge. They help you become the most knowledgeable person about a market. And they help you become the expert on that market, right? Like if we think about the most successful entrepreneurs, like in kind of pop culture, in what we understand as entrepreneurship, they're experts on their market, right? Like Mark Zuckerberg is an expert on social media. Like he just is. Like I'm trying to think, like Bill Gates is an expert on PC computing, right? Like you pick an entrepreneur and they're an expert on that market. And so your questions in your interviews should be about making you the expert in that market. And they should be inherently tied to the assumptions that you are making about that market. So, like, what I highly encourage you to do if you are a new entrepreneur, if you are trying to start a new business, is to take all of those assumptions and draft questions that are inherently related to those assumptions, right? So for an iPad, people would spend $500 to $1,000 on a handheld device. So what questions can I ask people that will confirm that they'd be willing to do that without leading them to the answer? So questions that you might ask, well, how often do you spend money on computers, right? Because an iPad is inherently an inexpensive computer. What do you wish your phone could do? How do you use your laptop? And how often do you use your laptop, right? For Quibi, it might be like, what other streaming platforms are you using? Then you as an entrepreneur can say like, oh, they use these platforms and not these platforms. What's the pattern there? How often do you use YouTube? How often do you watch videos on your phone, right? The thing about Quibi is that they had very, very high quality scripted content. And it turns out that all of the trends in the short-term media space tended to be around user-generated content. TikTok and YouTube, which are the kind of more common like short-term platforms, are all about user-created content. So we're going to talk a little bit about some interview best practices, and then we're going to get to some practice. So I know that there are people in this session, and I want to see some volunteers in the chat by the time we get there to help do some practice interviewing. First off, interviews should be substantial, right? They should be things that you schedule into your calendar. They should be 30 to 60-minute sit-down sessions with who you think is your customer. And they should be conducted in person, ideally, although I will say during global pandemics, it's okay to conduct them via video conferencing, right? And the reason is because you're trying to pick up on more than what they say, right? It's not just about what they say in reaction to your questions. It's about how they say it, right? How passionate are they about what you're talking about? How is their reaction exasperated, right? You ask a question and they just go like, oh, I wish someone would solve this problem. It is the most frustrating thing that I face every day as I like do my job, right? Like I just need this solved. That reaction tells you how big a priority your solution is to the problem you're trying to solve. If you ask them a question about the problem and they said, yeah, that is kind of a problem. Like, it's not what I think about most days. Like, I think about this and I think about that. And, you know, I don't know, it's kind of just a hassle. It's kind of a nuisance. I would like it solved. You can deduct a lot from that reaction, right? Like, they have limited budgets often. And so if they are making budgetary decisions about the problems that they are solving, they're going to solve the ones that exasperate them the most, the ones that frustrate them the most, more than the ones that are nuisances, right? And they can tell you a lot about whether or not they will pay for your idea, whether or not they will use your idea, whether or not they will ask their bosses to pay for their idea, whatever it is, whatever the level of stakeholder that you are interviewing is, it will tell you a lot about whether or not they are on your side, or whether or not they're against you, or whether or not they just don't care at all. Like, all of this is useful information as you think about the launch of your product, the launch of your solution. You should also talk about problems, not solutions, right? People's instinct is to create this new idea, create this solution, create this product, and then take it to customers and say, look at what I created. Look what I did. Like, I've been frustrated by this problem and I found a solution to you. Do you like it? And the thing is that that's going to create a lot of bias in their response. If you do that to a consumer or a customer, you know, if they are someone who cares about you because you used someone in your own network, they're going to be like, yeah, that's cool. I like that, right? Because they want to please you. They don't want to undermine your excitement about the product that you've created. There is a lot of reason for them to lie because they care about you, not about the product. So when you talk about a problem to them, instead of talking about your solution, what you inherently do is get them to react to what you see as the perceived problem, and you get them to understand, or you get them to give you insights into how big of a problem it is in their lives, right? Like, if they, like I already said, if they react in exasperation, that's a huge upside for you. If they mostly don't care about the product, then that gives you a lot of insight into what drives their behavior and allows you to think more creatively about how you might approach solving this problem. We have another message in chat that says, that happens when food servers ask how your meal is. Most people don't want to be rude and don't mention the problems with the food. Yes, this is a great example, right? Like most people don't want to be rude. So they're going to tell you that what you provided them was good, that what you did for them was good, right? They want to be nice to you, right? But the thing is that there's kind of a cheat code here, because if you express frustration to someone about a problem and you get them to react to that problem, people are very, very willing to rant, right? If you can get someone ranting in a customer interview, it's incredibly valuable, right? Like when I have a bad day at work and someone brings up something that is consistently a frustration in my job, I go, yes, I agree. Like, I wish someone would solve this problem for me. Like, oh my God, this was a nightmare, right? People love to complain. They love to rant. They love to tell you what is wrong with things, particularly when they know that it's not going to offend you, right? Like if it's your product, they're like, I'm not going to offend. But if it's just like kind of commiserate with me, like tell me about the things that frustrate you, they are willing to do so. And so you should frame questions in a way that gets them to respond to problems, not solutions. You should also prioritize the questions that validate your riskiest assumptions, right? Like what is the most important thing where like, if it's not true, you don't have a business, right? If it's not true, you're out of business. You should validate that thing first. You should get people talking about that frustration first, right? Like if we think back to Quibi, right? Like if they realized like no one cares about like short scripted content, they could have avoided a lot of money, a lot of headaches, right? Like, so the thing that matters the most, that's what you need to focus on. You should ask open questions and move to more narrow questions. We have a question about surveys. We're going to talk about surveys and we're going to talk about their role in customer research, but we're going to keep moving for now for just a second. And that's because your broadest questions where you want people just to respond to the problem, you don't want to prime them. You don't want to you don't want to lead them to specific answers. So you should start with those first. And as you move through the interview, you can begin to like nudge them into talking about the things that you want them to talk about, right? But if you nudge them into the things that you want to talk about first, they're unlikely to reveal the broader concerns, the broader frustrations that they experience later on in the conversation, in the interview. So start with the broadest things possible and then move to the more narrow things. And at the very end, and I don't actually recommend this, but some people do it and it's fine. At the very end, you could say, this was a very helpful interview. This is how I'm thinking of solving this problem. What do you think? And see how they respond to that. Just to prime, like maybe you'll get another conversation with them. The only risk to that is that if you give them too much information about how you're solving the problem, and then you have a whole bunch of interviews with customers and you realize you have to solve the problem in a different way, the next time you come back to them, they're going to be confused by the fact that you've changed your product, right? Like you don't want to lead them too much towards like, this is the product that I eventually want to sell to you. You want to let the conversation flow naturally. This is a big, like people are inherently kind of quantitative in the way they approach it, customer discovery and customer interviews. And what that means is they want to ask the same exact questions of every single person, every single time. And they want to be able to compare them across like a data set, right? And like, I understand why, right? Like that's valuable from a quantitative customer research standpoint. But you're closing off lines of conversation that may potentially key you in to key motivations inherent in your market. You want the market to drive your solution. You don't want your solution to drive the feedback that you're getting from your customers. I also encourage you to bring help, right? Bring a note taker to these meetings because it's really hard to take notes and to have the conversation at the same time. And the other upside to a note taker, the other upside to another person being there is that you then get to say like, okay, other person, this is what I heard. Did you hear the same thing? Maybe they heard drastically different takeaways than you did. And then finally, ask to be connected to more people in the industry, right? Like the people in industries who have similar jobs know each other. And you should take advantage of that, use them to build momentum as you become the expert in the problem you are solving, as you become the expert that you are pursuing a venture in. So some good ways to start the conversation, right? These are just kind of broad, good starter questions. Is like, what does your day look like? What does your schedule look like? Is your schedule consistent day to day, or is it cyclical throughout the year? What frustrates them? What frustrates them third most? Like, understand their priorities in a given day. How they currently solve the problem, right? Because if the problem is easily solved by free resources, it's going to be hard to convince them to pay for a new idea, a new product, or a new solution. And like I mentioned, these are really broad questions that you can use at the start of interviews before you get into narrowly tailored questions that are about validating the assumptions you have around a specific problem, around a specific industry. Let's see, we've got a couple chat messages here. I have found neutral responses without too much enthusiasm to be very helpful when talking to people. Yeah, it's information, right? Like, it tells you how much they care about it, right? If people are dismissive of the problem, very, 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 very low priority, that they're very low chance that they're willing to pay for a solution. Neutral, like, yeah, maybe I'll pay for it, maybe I won't. Like, I don't know, like it's a really good product, like who knows? If if they begin venting to you and they're like, solve this problem for me, here's money from my wallet, take it. Like that's the best case scenario. And there are some limitations to this, right? Customer interviews take a lot of time and energy, and particularly for consumer businesses, you need huge sample sizes to draw large conclusions, but they can drive your broader customer research efforts. There are a lot of ways to do market research, but the customer interviews are about understanding how customers think, how customers behave, and what are the key things that are driving those behaviors. And that'll help you plan around your other forms of customer research. It's inherently hard to quantify value with qualitative interviews, and it's a skill that takes a lot of practice, right? Like, I promise you, if you are new to customer discovery, if you're new to customer interviews, you will be bad at it at first. That's okay. Like everyone is bad at everything at first, but you should take the effort to begin developing that customer research skill, because I promise you it's a skill that you won't just use in the earliest stages of your venture. You will use it well beyond this customer research phase of your venture. Like, customer interviews and customer research is something that even the most established companies still do as they begin to think about making their products better and finding new and broader markets, right? So there's a chat here that says, I did 15 surveys on one of the problems I was working on, and every one of them had a different pressing problem. So it was not helpful. Like, surveys can be helpful, but like, actually that tells you a lot of information, right? Like, it tells you that the market doesn't behave similarly, right? But I'd encourage you to do actual customer interviews there, because there are some limitations to surveys, and we're going to get there right this moment. So people lie on surveys all the time. Like, I lie on surveys all the time. Like, chances are, if I get a survey, there's an incentive for me to fill out that survey. And sometimes if I'm like very busy, I'll mark random questions, right? There's inherent error in surveys. Or sometimes I don't want to tell them how I feel about something, right? I'll lie about it, like, because I want them to think that I have a certain perspective on something. So what you have to understand is that, like, surveys are very limited in like the questions that they can answer. They're also very hard to write well. Like, the people who write surveys for like the best polling firms in the world get paid a lot of money to do so, because it's very, very, very hard to write surveys well. Sample size, the makeup of the sample, the scope. That all matters a lot, right? And all of this is to say that you should and can, particularly consumer companies where your market is huge and you need a huge sample size, you should do surveys. Surveys can be a useful tool, but they give you different information than a customer interview. And thus you should treat them as a different use case. You should treat them as the information that you try and get from surveys should be different than the information you try and get from customer interviews. And so then the next question is why not secondary research, right? What are how is a market growing? What are the key trends within an industry, right? These industry reports can be really valuable. You see a lot of industry reports on pitches. These are important forms of customer research, but what you have to remember is that customer behavior and customer interviews provide you a lot of detailed nuance in a way that broad market reports just do not even approach, right? You want to be the expert on your market. If you read it, you're not an expert on your market if you just read market reports. Anyone can read market reports. The Wall Street Journal publishes market reports all the time. The people who read those are not experts in your industry, and you want to be an expert in your industry. So let's see, we've got a few chat messages here. I'm going to give a shameless plug for collaborating with behavioral scientists. They know how to create and interpret surveys. That's a big part of their training. Can't pay professionals, become friends with behavioral science students. That's a very entrepreneurial approach. I like that. You just figured out you had a problem and you solved it by talking to people and networking with people. That's great. Total oversimplification, but quant research is great for seeing behaviors. Qualitative research is great for attitudes. Yes, right? What are the attitudes about the markets that you are entering? And so finally, all of this is to get you to a really, really robust understanding about your market. So what if you were wrong? Right? This is a success, right? You saved time, you saved money on your venture. Think about the 1.75 billion in investment raised by Quibi that could have been saved by really understanding this market in a much more robust way. And you can pivot, right? Maybe I'm not saying that you have to shut down your business, but maybe your customer isn't who you thought it was. And your interviews helped you identify a new customer that really cares about the problem you're trying to solve. Or maybe it took a little bit of tweaks to the actual product, right? It was not your initial intent to solve whatever problem, but you could tweak it a little bit and solve a problem in a different way. That could also be a good outcome. But all of these outcomes are good, right? The opportunity cost of failing in a business is huge. And customer interviews just help you come to an understanding about your market much sooner than you would come to that understanding if you didn't do any customer research. You paid a whole bunch of developers, you built a product, you entered the market, you hired a marketing director to sell that product, and then just didn't get any traction, right? You can achieve these outcomes sooner and at lower cost than kind of the older way of entrepreneurship where you build the company and then hope it works. And that's inherently what entrepreneurship is about. It's about identifying problems, validating them, and iterating based on what you learned. It's very similar, as I said, to the scientific method. So I seeded this earlier, but we need a few volunteers. In the chat, please, I need 2 volunteers. All right, Ming is in.
Great.
And Retweak. Sorry if I didn't say your name right.
For those who would like to go in, I think there should be a button on the top right-hand corner that says share audio and video. If you can click that, I can bring you onto the stage.
Hi.
So this is an active. Hey, Retweak, is that how you say your name?
Ritvik, yeah, you got it.
Sorry. And Ming, hi, how are you?
Hi, how are you?
Real quick, and I'm not going to give you any more context. Which of you wants to be the interviewer and which one of you wants to be the interviewee?
I can be the interviewee. Okay.
Okay. just give me a second. I just want to preface this. So this is an activity that I learned from a mentor of mine and the person who helped found and create the I-Corps program at the Polsky Center, Star Marcello. It's a activity we still do in the I-Corps program at the University of Chicago. And it's just a practice interview, but like it'll give you a sense for like how you conduct customer interviews. So, sorry, Ritik, sorry.
Ritwik.
Ritik. Okay.
Ritwik, yeah.
Okay. Ritwik. Okay. I need you to, this has to be like honor system. I need you to mute like just until you can come back on at 3:56. I need you to mute yourself, turn your camera off. Like I don't want you to see what's happening.
Sounds great.
All right. So honor system, I don't think Ritik can hear us anymore. Ming, you need to figure out if Ritik is a customer for this product. Wait,
Okay.
All right, did you see it?
Yeah.
Do you know what that is?
What is so? It's either a slow cooker or no, it's not. What is that thing called?
It's an instant
pot. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
It's a pressure cooker, a slow cooker, all in one. So, what are the assumptions, do you think, built around whether or not someone will use this product?
Maybe assumptions are whether they cook or not, their role in the family, their age range, maybe their cultural background, what type of things they eat, and where they live in the country, whether food is provided for, things like that.
Yeah, those are all, you've got a combination of demographics and assumptions, right? But demographics can help you lead to assumptions, right? Like, do they cook or not? Is their role in the family to cook or not, right? And then you talked about age, right? Like the assumption, you take that to the next step, right? The assumption is, does someone at their age regularly use a device like this, right? Like take it to the next step. What is the assumption? So what are questions that we can begin to ask about this product that will give us a sense for whether or not he's a customer for it?
Right.
Remember, we don't want to show this to him. We don't want to say, this is an Instant Pot, would you use it? We want to figure out whether he would use it without telling him what it is.
Correct. How often, how big a part is food or homemade food part of your life? Maybe what's your household makeup like? What's your routine around food? Maybe how often do you go out for food? How often do you cook at home? And do you invest in different cookware at home, or do you look at recipes? Like, what's your level of do you enjoy food, cooking as an activity versus just a chore, things like that?
I love these questions, right? Because whether or not you invest in cookware gets at willingness to spend money. Do you cook? It answers the question, like, will he use this product? Is this a problem that he is looking to solve? I'd also mention that Instant Pots are all about speed and efficiency. So how much time does he have in the day? Those are all key questions that get at assumptions about whether or not he will use this product. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes.
All right. So it's 3:56 now. I think Ritik is going to join any second. We'll wait a second, but we'll figure out if he's a customer for this. You're going to ask him questions. You're just going to interview him live in front of everyone.
Great.
And then at the very end, we'll decide whether or not he's a customer for it or not. Does that work?
Sounds great.
So we'll wait for Ritik to join, and we'll pause for a second, and you can begin question ideas. If anyone wants to put question ideas in the chat, please do so.
And how many are we shooting for? You will stop us when it's time?
Well, yeah, it's 3:57. We need to wrap up by about 4. So let's just do 2 or so minutes of questions, because this is the last thing we're going to do.
Sounds great.
I just popped in to ask, how will I know when to come back?
Oh, this is the time.
You can come back in.
Oh, okay.
This is perfect timing.
Sounds great. Okay. Let me turn on my camera. Okay, sounds great.
All right.
All right.
Riddick, right?
Ritwik. Yes, Ritwik.
Okay. Hi. Thanks
Hi.
for coming to the interview today. I've got some questions for you
Sure.
around your routines and especially around food.
Mhm.
So can you tell me a bit about, how big of a part is food as part of your life? Do you enjoy it? Is it short? Like what kind of?
I mean, I love eating food. I love good food with a lot of flavor. Um, um, I have been kind of busy recently. So I started working as a new grad product manager. So I come home like a little bit late.
Right.
I'm lazy. I make ramen. If I'm feeling especially motivated, I try to make something. But other than that, I try to like eat out a couple times a week.
You eat out a couple of times. Okay. In a maybe more ideal situation, like where once your work is onto a routine and more on track, are you more the eating out type or staying cooking from home type? Like what's your feel on that?
At this point of time, I think I would be more of an eating in type. I'm trying to save a good amount of money to go to grad school, so I've been like trying to focus my budget a little bit more.
Right.
So I think I would be more of an eating in type at this point.
Cool. Yeah. How do you feel about around cooking? Do you invest? Do you like, do you enjoy cooking? Do you invest in kind of like cooking wear or anything like that?
Right. That's a good question. Okay. Invest in cooking wear. I mean, I want a really good like non-stick pan. Uh, something like a waffle maker, maybe something like that.
Okay.
Something that makes cooking easy. I don't want to spend a lot of time like doing manual labor. Something like if there's something that makes something really easily, yeah.
For sure. What about the trade-off then in that case between convenience and money? Are you willing to spend a bit more to get something that can buy you some time for making food?
I would say to a certain limit, yes.
Yeah.
Like if for cooking utensils, right? If it's over $100, I would probably not think of it too much. But like below 100, I would invest. Yeah.
Cool.
All right, we're just about out of time. So Ming, do you think he's a customer?
I think he has a potential.
Yeah, so I would say, that means yes, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Would you use an Instant Pot, Ritwik?
I would, yeah.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
I'm Asian. I love eating Indian food.
Right. So
I would use it.
Awesome.
Do you see how like asking questions can help you figure out whether or not he's a customer without kind of priming him? Like, do you like Instant Pots? Do you not like Instant Pots? Right? Like, we don't care about the Instant Pot brand or his preconceived notions. We just care, would he use it? And it seems like he would. And so I just want to thank both of you. I'm going over time, so I just want to wrap up. I want to say thank you. For those of you who participated today, you can reach me at lucas.peralta@chicagobooth.edu. Learn more about the Polsky Center, please. We're excited to bring more and more entrepreneurial education to the city of Chicago. You can find more information about us at polsky.uchicago.edu. And I'm happy to send anyone any more resources about customer discovery if they would like. There's lots of free resources out there. Happy to share those with you. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming, Luke. We really appreciate you being here. For the audience members, I encourage you to head to the main stage for our next event, a fireside chat with Chicago's Deputy Mayor, Samir Maker, and guest CEO of Uber Freight, Lior Ron. So in order to get there, just please click stage on the left-hand side. And if it's okay with Lucas, maybe we can hang around a bit to answer any remaining questions. But otherwise, this concludes the event. So thank you all for coming.
Happy to.
Actually, if there are no more remaining questions, then I guess this is the